legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries.
This is the Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, it falls again on the coaching staff. Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
You know, when you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready? Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. And as always, it is a Tuesday night, which means that it is the fantasygurus.org segment with yours truly of that site, CJ Krainock. He joins us right off the bat. How you doing?
Hey, man. I am great. How about you?
Doing good. First off, I gotta ask. You were on vacation. You didn't. So where'd you go? Did you go to Cabo? Did you go to Hawaii? Did you go to?
I wish I was one of those places. No, man. I was in Salt Lake visiting family.
All right. How was it? It was nice seeing family. Thanksgiving was good. Did you eat a bunch of food?
Yeah, you know it, dude. I mean, what's Thanksgiving without stuff in your face?
Right. Exactly. Watching football. Maybe eating a little bit too much pumpkin pie with some whipped cream and cherry pie, pecan pie.
Yeah, I don't know about you, man, but my family's not cool with me turning on football all day on Thanksgiving. But you know what? I find a way to do it anyway. So.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of kick it off and talk about the this Thursday night matchup, because it is a matchup that is in kind of you could say a whirlwind division that was at the top of the season. You're looking at, frankly, all of these teams being playoff contenders. And now you're looking at it where Philadelphia, who would have thought that Carson Wentz, and we digress about Carson Wentz, because we spent so much time talking about him. But, now you get to the standpoint that Carson Wentz and particularly the Philadelphia Eagles are running away with that division handily. And not only that, but are proving to be the best team in the National Football League. So now you get to this Thursday night matchup between the Redskins and the Cowboys, and maybe in particular a potential Denver Bronco quarterback next year in Kirk Cousins leading the helm. Who are some of your fantasy standouts in that game?
Okay, yeah. So when we talk about the Thursday night game, I think that our opinions have changed a lot on some of the players that are playing. Dak Prescott at the beginning of the year was a top 10 quarterback on every site that you looked at, and Zeke Elliott was the top running back, if not, top 5, if not the top running back. And everybody was high on Dez Bryant and what he was going to do. And now you look towards Thursday and you wonder what happened. And, obviously the Ezekiel Elliott suspension has affected the Cowboys a lot, but you're looking at Dak Prescott, Dez Bryant, and all of the backup Cowboys running backs being almost completely irrelevant, which I'm not sure we would have thought at the beginning of the year. I know nobody predicted that. And now I want to talk a little bit about Dak Prescott. And, this was somebody that was a top 10 quarterback coming into the year. A lot of people were really high on him, said that he might even finish in the top 5. It was Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz. And now it's Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. And, Dak Prescott is not a start every week for me anymore. He's matchup dependent, and if he's even matchup dependent, I would not start him this week, and I wouldn't start him until Zeke Elliott gets back because he hasn't proven to me that he's worthy of that. And all of the Cowboys running backs, we thought that maybe McFadden or Morris or Rob Smith would step it up. Nobody's really seeming to do that. The offense is just stalling out. So those running backs aren't really relevant for me either. If you can avoid starting them, I would avoid that. Which I think that this week is kind of the tale of the seasons for the Cowboys and the Redskins, when it's just, in fantasy purposes, just a lot of non-starters and just people that have underperformed. And I think you start Kirk Cousins this week if you have him. Cowboys look like they've almost given up, and I think that Kirk Cousins can gash them. Maybe Jamison Crowder. I would look at him. He's had a couple big weeks. He's really proving himself as a wideout in that system. He's a plug-and-play guy for me this week. But those are really the only two guys that I'm looking at. And Samaje Perine is up there also, but one of those guys that's really hard to trust. So you're looking at the Thursday night game. You're looking at the tale of the seasons for both those teams, which is not a lot of great performers.
Two questions, and it's about the Thursday night game, and maybe really it's a fantasy question, maybe mixed in with just an NFL question in your mind. How much do you think the Ezekiel Elliott loss really is on the offense, and is that just a testament to how good Ezekiel Elliott is, or is it the fact that maybe we put so much stock into the offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys that really they aren't that good?
Yeah, I think that the offensive line for the Cowboys is closer to average this year than they have been in the past. They were completely dominant the last few years. We have to admit that. But I think that they're closer to average this year. They've had some injuries that have made that. But I think that this is a real testament to two different things. And I think that that is how poor the coaching has actually been. And I think that, and how good Ezekiel Elliott is. And I think Ezekiel Elliott covers up for those poor play calls and the poor scheme that they've been in. The Cowboys were not a great team before Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott came along. And they're in the same scheme for the most part. And, nothing has really changed. I think that, I don't know if Jerry Jones will pull the plug. He seems to be worried about other things above him instead of below. And,
it's a good way to put it.
yeah. And I just don't think that I don't think the scheme is that great. I think Ezekiel Elliott is great, and he alone, with that dominant offensive line that they've had, could make up for a lot of sins. And now they're just not getting it. Alfred Morris is not the same back. Neither is Smith. Neither is McFadden. McFadden's not even on the team anymore. They cut him. And I think that this is looking really poorly on the coaching staff of the Cowboys. And it should tell you right now, if you're in a dynasty league, I think you should be doing everything you can to trade for Zeke, for somebody who's desperate for a playoff run that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Try to get Zeke because it's obvious that he's that good. We weren't imagining it. So go out and get him.
Well, and his suspension is going to be lifted here soon, if I'm not mistaken. So, and it's going to be right around that playoff time also. Another question. I had a question in my head, and now it's kind of escaping me. But when you really look at the just this season overall, there's been a few surprises, and I think you mentioned him before, personal ties. Really, talking about Brett Hundley, but really, Brett Hundley had himself a game. And I think, you think about certainly the development of a young quarterback. No matter how long he's been in the league, it still takes game action to really gain all those reps for a player. And I think that when you look at the grand scheme of things, it does affect how you perform. I think for Brett Hundley, and now having a great game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we all know historically that Pittsburgh hasn't had the best defense. However, so far this season, they've been pretty decent. I mean, they're in the top 10, top 15 of defensive categories, which is the best that it's ever been, I can imagine, in the last few years. So they are getting better defensively. Does that give you comfortability now as a fantasy owner, saying that Brett Hundley put up those type of numbers against the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think Brett Hundley looked pretty good. And, I've come on this show, and, at first I was really hyping up Hundley. I didn't think he was going to be a top 10 guy, but I thought he was going to be a middle-of-the-pack quarterback for the rest of the year fantasy-wise, and actually he's kind of shaping up to be that. And, after a couple weeks where he struggled, I came on here and I told everyone I was wrong and that he's actually awful. I think that he's somewhere in between what I was talking about the first time and what I admitted the second time. I think that he's, an average to below average quarterback, and he has the potential to be an average quarterback. And for fantasy-wise, that if you're in a 2-quarterback league or a dynasty league, that might be good enough. But I don't see performances like last week happening again for the rest of the year with Brett Hundley. I think that they were really fired up for this game, the Packers were, because this was what felt like, to me, the make-or-break game for them. If they won this game, they were going to have a shot to maybe make it to the bridge over to Aaron Rodgers. We saw him throwing pregame. He looked pretty good. He was launching the ball deep. And, maybe that gave everyone a little confidence, like, let's go win this game and see if we can make it. And then they lost a heartbreaker. And I think that that's going to take its toll. We're not going to see as great a performance from everyone. I thought the receivers played really well, and I just don't think you're going to see that again. And so I'm avoiding Brett Hundley in leagues for the rest of the year unless you're desperate. But I think that there are some better quarterbacks out on the waiver wire than you can do with Hundley.
Fantasy Gurus insider CJ Krainock joining the show as always on Tuesday. Let's fast forward now to the weekends and your top performers for the weekend. Who are some of your top performers? Your starts, sits as far as for this upcoming weekend. You mentioned a little bit about your starts and sits and top performers for the Thursday night, but as far as the weekend, who are some of your guys?
Alvin Kamara, however you say it.
It's Kamara.
Yeah, he looked great, man. Like 33 fantasy points.
Yeah.
And he is now the number 3 running back in fantasy football. If you drafted him in your league, you probably got him pretty late. Good for you. And we've hyped him up. I know a lot of people have hyped him up as he's a true, maybe a 3-down back. If not, he at least has a lot of upside as a pass catcher. And in that offense, and running out of the shotgun as much as he does, I think that he's got some real potential. Obviously, he's probably not going to be available in your league. So let's talk about some people that are. And Robbie Anderson, who I've talked about a lot on this show, just had a day on Sunday and scored 29 fantasy points. Now he's going up against the Kansas City defense this week, who has been awful. They're the 31st ranked defense against opposing wide receivers. And after he just shredded Carolina for 6 catches, 146 yards, and 2 touchdowns, I'm rolling with Robbie Anderson every week. Another person that very similar situation, Keenan Allen, who's owned in a lot of leagues, but man, he's really come on as of late. He's had 33 and 28 points in the last 2 weeks and jumped up to a top 10 wide receiver. But somebody that might be available in a lot of your leagues, and Cameron, maybe you could tell me why you think this, that this is happening, but Case Keenum, he's available. He's only owned in 37% of leagues, and he was your number 3 quarterback last week. Scored the 3rd most points for the quarterback position last week. And, since he's become a starter, he's really come on. So what do you think about Case Keenum?
It's interesting because I know that you saw it, but I put kind of a heartfelt apology to Case Keenum that was basically signed by the entirety of Broncos country just for the sake of bringing him down over those last few years just because he's been horrible. And maybe it's just the case that it just was the system that that was being run when he was with Jeff Fisher. But, I come back to it. And this isn't really a fantasy point, but ever since he came out of college, out of the University of Houston, I really have enjoyed watching him throw a football. And to clarify, throwing a football, it's kind of like Trevor Siemian. Trevor Siemian throws a very beautiful ball, but throwing a ball doesn't necessarily attribute to accuracy. And so with Case Keenum, it's kind of that way a little bit to the point where I love the way he throws the football. But right now, with the way that Case Keenum is playing, he's not just throwing the ball. He's throwing the ball with accuracy. He's throwing the ball with an incredibly strong arm. He's establishing rapport with maybe a better slot receiver in the game right now that really has come on the last 2-3 years in Adam Thielen. And so I think as far as Case Keenum is concerned, I hate to compare it to the Aaron Rodgers, for you and the Green Bay Packers, but really he throws the ball off his back foot, potentially maybe as well as Aaron Rodgers, because he has the ability to fling it all over the yard. He's shown the ability to do that ever since he was at Houston. It's just been his accuracy, the inconsistency, and when he gets pressured, he gets flustered. But every single quarterback in the National Football League, if you throw pressure at them, they're going to be flustered. And so I think that for Case Keenum, he's proving to a lot of people in the NFL circles that they need to reevaluate how they look at quarterbacks. And so I think as far as Case Keenum is concerned, and then even with fantasy is concerned, he's proving that he's not just a quarterback that maybe is a start ever so often. He's proving now that he should be a QB1 every single game and every single week.
Yeah, let me throw this stat at you. Since week 8, Case Keenum is tied for second place in fantasy points with Carson Wentz and Cam Newton. He is only behind Tom Brady. Those are 3 MVP names right there, and Case Keenum is right in the middle of them.
He's having a quiet MVP year, and and that's the thing. We were talking about how Jared Goff was kind of having a quiet, MVP season. I would even imagine that Case Keenum's having a very, very quiet MVP season compared to Jared Goff and others. Obviously, Carson Wentz is the front runner, and he should be. But Case Keenum deserves a whole lot of credit as far as that team is concerned. If there's the one knock just overall about the Minnesota Vikings, it's the fact that they have never really had a stable quarterback that could really take this team to another level. And this is now where we're starting to get it. You're starting to get Case Keenum, that is now given the keys to the car, by Mike Zimmer. I can't think of the head coach. But he's now being given the keys to the car right now for the Minnesota Vikings offense. And frankly, he should be running away with it, and he is.
Yeah, the crazy thing for me is I keep hearing people, mostly on Twitter, saying, well, this is just biding time for Teddy Bridgewater.
First off, I was going to say...
What are you talking about right now? I mean, I know Teddy Bridgewater is, has proven himself to be a good quarterback, but that was, a new knee ago.
Yeah.
And Case Keenum has given them no reason to even think about switching. They're winning games. He's throwing touchdowns. He's throwing for 300 yards a game. What else would you want? He looks the part of a captain out there. everybody knows that I'm a Packers fan.
But you're talking about the Vikings. I mean, the Vikings are one of the greatest rivals.
Yeah, I hate the Vikings, dude. It pains me to watch a Vikings game, but I did this last week, and I watched Case Keenum, and I couldn't tell you how many times I just said, "Wow." Mostly because it's Case Keenum, and who would have expected him to be playing this well, but also because he was legitimately making great plays.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we're not talking about him as an MVP candidate. Nobody is. But you look at his stats and you compare him next to Carson Wentz's, they're very similar. And I think Case Keenum has less of a supporting cast than Wentz does. And it surprised me that he's not getting more attention. And he's still available in 63% of leagues.
That's just insane.
So that's absurd.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you think of the Cooper Kupp insanity. This is more insanity because of the fact of the numbers that the guy is putting up. And I think that, and this kind of goes to real life in a way, it's because we all are waiting for him to hit rock bottom again. And I think that when we see players like this that have a history of kind of falling on their face every single week, talking about Case Keenum, you just wonder, well, when is that going to be? And maybe that's kind of the one knock that I could have maybe on Case Keenum right now. He hasn't really had a bad week of NFL football for quite a while. And that's obviously going to skyrocket your confidence and the mental toughness for you as a quarterback and just really as a player in any sport. But let's just say that he has one bad game. Obviously, he has a terrific defense that he can go off of, so the amount of mistakes certainly, he can play to a defensive strength. Now, I do think, though, that if, let's just say he has a bad game here in the last few weeks, could that potentially spiral to the point where we start seeing the Case Keenum that we've seen the last few years? Maybe. And I think that could have some merit just because of the fact that, we don't know how long he can keep this up.
Right. You look at, he's got Atlanta this week, which is an okay defense, and then Carolina the next week. And I think you're really going to see in these next 2 weeks whether this was all legit or not. And, it could come spiraling down. We could see Teddy Bridgewater in week 15. Everyone's team is still confident in him. But I don't know. With the way that he's been playing, I don't know. I mean, and that's, if you're looking at on the waiver wire for a quarterback, then that means that you don't have one of these surefire guys like Wentz or Brady. And I don't see how you could do better than Case Keenum. Yeah, he's an if. He's definitely a big if. But that big if has gotten you 17, 24, 17, 27 fantasy points in the last 4 weeks that he's played. And you could do a lot worse than that. I mean, the fact that... what am I thinking of? Well, the fact that some of these quarterbacks like Jameis Winston are owned more than Case Keenum right now. He hasn't done anything to prove that he's any better. Every week he's had a worse week than Case Keenum, but he's owned in more leagues. So I think that if you're looking on the waiver wire for a quarterback, he is the best you got.
Who are some of your other kind of under the radar starts and sits this coming weekend?
So I'm going to give you
not named Cooper Kupp. We should probably clarify that. That's not named Cooper Kupp.
Not named Cooper Kupp. All right, I'm going to give you a big no-name here. Ricky Seals-Jones, tight end from Arizona, the Cardinals, and has just shown whatever kind of chemistry with Blaine Gabbert since he got put in. And in the last 2 weeks, he's had 18.5 and 15 fantasy points. And this last 15 was against Jacksonville. So he has some kind of chemistry with Blaine Gabbert. And he is probably, at this point, I'd add him. If you've got, that bottom tier of tight end is really hard. You're just kind of picking and choosing, throwing darts at a wall and seeing what sticks. And I think that why not? Give him a shot. They play the Rams The Rams, they've been pretty tough against tight ends, but normally, you can see some shootouts happen with the Rams. Why not? Give them a start. See how it goes. Then he's got Tennessee, Washington, and the Giants for the playoffs. That's a good schedule for me. So, dash him on your bench, see if he has a good week against the Rams, and if he does, plug him in your lineup for the next couple weeks while you're in playoffs. And I think it's worth it. Unless you have somebody like Evan Ingram or Zach Ertz, then he's worth adding for sure. And also Cooper Kupp.
You just had to slide that one in there, didn't you?
Dude, I told you the week was coming. He had 8 receptions, 116 yards this week against New Orleans. 8 receptions, 116 yards. But he didn't get in the end zone. So guess what? Nobody's talking about him still. Still available in 40% of leagues. Please add him. He's going against Arizona. They're terrible. Please let him. Just put him in your lineup. I don't care if Patrick Peterson is going to be shadowing him the whole game. Put him in your lineup.
Is he this is kind of interesting because, people see him as a Julian Edelman type. They see him as a guy that is in the slot. But as far as production and everything, he's 6 feet. He's thick and big enough to actually even be a wide receiver number 1 if given that. And maybe he is a wide receiver number 1 because of the offenses that are run in the National Football League nowadays. Sometimes the slot receiver, you look at the Patriots for that matter, the slot receiver could end up being your number 1 target and your number 1 wide receiver. So, in your eyes, is Cooper... See, and for me, and I can just give you a little bit of some history, because I've scouted some players and I first started kind of going in that process the last few years. People are going to think I was crazy. People thought I was crazy. And obviously he wasn't drafted in the first round. But I had a first-round grade on Cooper Kupp. Just because of the amount of impact that he made. And people look at the game, I believe it was against Washington State and then Oregon. Fact is, he put up 400 yards against top competition in 2 games, and put up a lot of touchdowns in that span. So he is a very productive wideout, and I just think that he is tremendously savvy of a route runner, and his hands are incredible. I don't know if you guys saw that play. It's a few weeks back, 3, 4, 5 weeks back. He was near the end zone. He fell down, he slipped, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he slipped, and it was not the best throw from Goff, but he slipped, and he reached his hands and grabbed the ball, caught it, and literally stole it from the defender that was closing in. That just kind of shows you the incredible hands and ball skills for a wide receiver. So Cooper Kupp is a very legit wide receiver. So sorry to kind of go down 2 different bunny trails there, but so CJ, where would you put him as far as fantasy goes? We've been talking him up so much, but maybe just on a personal level, where would you put him? Is he wide receiver 1? Is he wide receiver 2?
Yeah, I think he's a wide receiver, probably wide receiver 2. He's probably between like receiver 13 and 25 total, which is great because when you're in a 10-team league, you're rostering 40, 50 wide receivers. So he's in the top half of those rostered people, but he's still available in 40% of league. And Robert Woods is hurt. He's probably going to be out this week against Arizona. So he's their number 1 receiver. There's no other way to put it. He's going to be their number 1 guy. And when you look at, I don't understand. Most people get really excited about rookie wide receivers, and nobody's getting excited about Cooper Kupp. And look at all these other rookie wide receivers this year, and they haven't done anything. Cooper Kupp's one of the only ones, if not the only one, to have a productive year. And nobody's talking about him. Still available in 40% of leagues. I don't know why, but I don't know. Just plug him in. We talked about it so many weeks.
I know. It does get exhausting. By the way, some breaking news. I don't know if you follow the college football carousel, coaching carousel right now, but apparently, Mike Gundy's name has been thrown around as a possibility for the Tennessee job in the last, 12 hours. Well, apparently, I just there was a tweet out there that said that Mike Gundy has decided to stay at the University of Oklahoma State and not take the Tennessee job. So, I mean, just the whole thing as far as the coaching carousel of Tennessee, Greg Schiano was hired, and then there was that huge media backlash. I mean, huge media and social media backlash that Tennessee decided to back off the contract and fire, I guess, Greg Schiano in the last 2 hours of the hire that they did. But so a little bit of some breaking news.
Yeah, talk about a taboo job. I don't know if anybody's going to want to work at Tennessee now.
I know.
I mean, we don't have to share our opinions on Schiano, but I think that, Tennessee backing out of a contract within 2 hours does not look very good on the university.
No, and especially for a university that hired Lane Kiffin, too. I mean, so what kind of track record do they have, necessarily, that is going to say that they've had a really good head coach? I mean, aside from their basketball program, So it's just a bad look overall. I mean, you were looking at John Gruden, and there's talks that a interview happened or didn't happen, and all of a sudden they hire Greg Schiano, and then that literally pooped the bed, and then they went to go after Mike Gundy, and Mike Gundy did the smart thing by turning it down. And all right. So enough fantasy talk for the Fantasy Gurus analyst, because, well, we're talking about analysts. He's also that baseball guru, and we've talked a little bit about it. The Major League Baseball winter meetings is going to be starting up next week, and I believe, based on all indications that I know of, it's going to be starting at the end of the week, if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be starting kind of on the 8th, I believe. It's kind of on that Wednesday, Thursday, before it goes into the weekend. Who are some of the guys potentially for you, CJ? And this isn't really Rockies necessarily, that maybe you could potentially see. And let's just start with this one. The Shohei Ohtani, the Japanese pitcher that's going to be paid, well, a lot of money. Let's just start with that, and you and I can give our opinion on this, but is it smart for a player, and maybe this is any sport, but is it smart for a player to double his way on a field, pitch and hit?
I'd love to see it. I know everybody would love to see it, just to watch him try. It hasn't been done in a very long time, effectively at least. And we'd all love to see him try. Is a major league team going to let him? Probably not, because that's probably not the smartest idea. And I think, when you look at the stress that comes with pitching on your throwing arm, and then not having those days off, I know in Japan that they have more days off between starts, and he's already going to be trying to get used to going every 5 days or 6 days, as opposed to every sixth starter. He's going to be going every 5. And that's already going to be hard. It's going to be different. Getting your arm on a different throwing program is difficult. And then you add not resting in between. And I don't care if he plays first base or outfield or whatever, you're going to be making throws at some point in the game. Your arm needs that time off. It needs to be in a program. And so I would worry about his arm health, and I think that other people will too. And since he throws 100, he should be on the mound. So I imagine that's where we'll end up seeing him.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of an interesting situation, really, because you just never see it. I mean, you're seeing it more often, obviously, in football, and actually you're seeing it this year with Adoree Jackson, a guy that's shown some capability of playing on the offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball, and frankly playing really good on the defensive side of the ball. He's playing better as a defensive back. But these two-way players that are going to play offense and defense, or in this case being a pitcher and a hitter, I really do think that it benefits it from the standpoint from being a pitcher. He understands the type of pitches that will be thrown necessarily that could make him be a really good hitter. That all told, every pitcher's not the same. I mean, you're going to face those pitchers that are knuckleballers, that are effective knuckleballers like R.A. Dickey, who has wicked movement on his knuckleballer, or you're going to face a pitcher that doesn't exactly have a pitch in your exact repertoire. Talking about a pitcher if he's at the plate. And
yeah, well, think about like what would happen if Ohtani gets up to bat and Aroldis Chapman hits him in the hand.
Yeah.
I mean,
obviously that's kind of
a let that happen.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of a maybe a fluky situation because you can't really predict that. It happens, but you know what's going to happen with that. You know, if it does transpire, you know, does he? Now, if he was like the ultimate superhuman pitcher, where he could hit and he can throw, and he's an ambidextrous thrower, well, then literally you're looking at a legitimate superhero. Because if he gets hit on his, let's just say his right hand, and he's also a left-handed thrower,
just switch.
Right, you just switch. But that's kind of taking a funny trail. But I just think it would be very difficult early on, and maybe it would be really interesting to see how he adjusts. Because ultimately, it's kind of like a switch hitter. You know, we were talking about it with Dexter Fowler for a period when he was with the Rockies. You know, he was a really good right-handed hitter for the Colorado Rockies, and a lot of people were really discussing the fact that maybe he should just become a permanent right-handed hitter versus a left-handed hitter. And so, or maybe it's the other way around. I can't remember. But it's kind of that way. Like, if he decides to find some comfortability more as a hitter versus a pitcher, well, then it becomes a scenario where it's best, and we can talk about the free agency and maybe not pinpoint a team, but it's best for an American League team to sign Ohtani. Because then you know for a fact that if he just wants to be a hitter, well, you can just designate him to be a designated hitter, and he doesn't have to play in the field. So
yeah, which is it's disappointing because, you know, the Rockies being in the National League and other teams that we like to watch being in the National League because we're on this side of the country, you wish you could see him over here. But I really don't think that'll happen unless he goes to one of those American League teams in California or Texas. Because, yeah, I think an American League team will sign him because they're going to use that as a luring point to say, hey, you could potentially DH for us. And I don't know if they're going to really let him do it, but they can tell him that and try to get him to come over, and I think that's what will happen.
You know, and obviously some teams that are being thrown around is the Yankees because of obviously what they did with Masahiro Tanaka in Texas, because of what they did to Yu Darvish, and so those are obviously some teams certainly that could be in the mix. You know, I don't understand a National League team being in there except for the pull of what Jake Arrieta did with the Chicago Cubs and Madison Bumgarner with the San Francisco Giants being able to hit, you know, bombs basically every 5th, 6th, 7th day, every so often if you want to. Obviously that's, you know, a slight exaggeration, but the fact is that Madison Bumgarner and Jake Arrieta are one of the best, you know, power hitting pitchers in the game. And so really for the sake of Ohtani, he has to prove that he can be a hitter, and the only way he can do that is the American League.
I think it's hard enough to adjust as just a hitter or just a pitcher coming over from the Japanese leagues. I couldn't imagine trying to do both. If he can do it, he's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime player. But you can't bank on that. You really can't. You know, your best bet is that he's not going to be that once-in-a-lifetime player, but maybe he can be a great pitcher or a great hitter, but maybe not both.
Yeah. Let's take a beat on that one and talk about the Rockies, because we were talking about it about a week ago, actually maybe a week and a half ago, where we were talking about potentially players that they should kick the tires on. And we kind of went after it. And obviously Jeff Bridich has been very quiet as far as who he targets overall as far as free agents go. However, they have made it known, apparently, through everything that we've heard and everything that happens through social media, because rumor mills get started on social media, that they are one of several teams that's going to kick the tires on Jake Arrieta.
Yeah,
Boy.
and we were on this show a couple weeks ago saying that they needed to try to sign Arrieta. Maybe we know what we're talking about. Yeah, I think that he'd be a great signing for them. He's exactly what they need, is a guy with some good secondary pitches, some good life on the fastball, and who's got some experience that can help these younger pitchers. That's exactly what they need. But like we were talking about, we were mentioning this before the show started when we were discussing. I don't know if they're going to throw money at him and then money at Arenado later and then money at Blackman. That's a lot. So if they throw money at Arrieta, it's going to be almost an all-in year for them.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting decision because, you know, for the Rockies, their main priority should be signing Jonathan Lucroy. At least from that point. But what kind of money are you wanting to throw at Jonathan Lucroy? Because right now, the only team that could potentially vie for his services is the Houston Astros. And boy, you want to talk about a team that could legitimately love to have a true starting catcher that's going to contribute to maybe one of the best staffs in all of baseball. Now that they just signed or traded for Justin Verlander, it's the Houston Astros. And it's the ability now to get a guy like a Jonathan Lucroy that can handle that pitching staff. And with everything that he did with the Colorado Rockies young pitching staff, it certainly would be appealing knowing the fact that they won a World Series. But for the Rockies' sake, they did make the postseason. And so that obviously is a little bit of a pull for Lucroy. So I think it's ultimately, should they sign Jonathan Lucroy to a hefty contract, and maybe if you do decide to go after Arrieta, what type of deal would you want to sign for both Arrieta and Lucroy? Do you want to get Lucroy for maybe convince him that, hey, we're really trying hard to get Arrieta? I think what you should do is maybe sign a lesser contract, and then we can get Arrieta so that we can build around you, or build around this team, and get a guy like an Arrieta. You know, and I think that the one area for, no pun intended, or pun intended, using the word air, I just realized that, for Jake Arrieta, if he's on and he's consistent, I don't know if there's a better sinker in the entire major leagues. Just because of the amount of movement that he can generate with his pitch. I mean, the ability to basically go maybe 8 inches from left to right on a sinker is incredibly deadly if he's 100% healthy. Would you agree?
I agree. I think that you're going to need some real team approaches, some guys that are not me first guys, in order to get Arrieta's deal done. Like you said, Lucroy might have to be persuaded to take less, and who else would have to take less? If you're going to bring Holland back, you might have to take less if they're going to go all in for it, because I doubt they're going to spend that much, knowing what's on the horizon with Arenado eventually going to need a big contract, probably maybe the biggest ever contract when he ends up signing it. And Blackman will be up, and you don't know what you're going to do with some of these guys. So if they're gonna go for Arrieta, it's going to be an all-in year, and you're going to have to see some team-friendly deals happening, and hopefully the Rockies have the guys that will do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the guy that I've heard sprinkled around potentially that has been of interest to the Rockies And I really like this as far as being sprinkled as a potential name for the bullpen, and that's Brandon Kinsler, the guy from the Minnesota Twins, the flamethrower. He's a guy that can absolutely throw the fastball. And if there's one thing as far as consistency and everything with the back end of the bullpen, if they can afford to say, maybe not bring back Holland, but they can bring back a guy like Jake McGee, who proved himself worthy, at least consistently, to warrant maybe being retained, maybe over any of the relievers. Well, just for the sake that Holland may not be back. I just think that would be a pretty good bullpen if you can retain a McGee, and then you get a guy like a Brandon Kinsler, and then you focus a little bit on the first base side of things and so on and so forth. Last question before I take you go is the first base question. Where do you go?
We talked about this a little bit before the show, and I think that you have Blackman. He's going to be your center fielder next year. And you look at right field and left field, and you have Desmond, who can play first base and outfield. You have Tapia. You have Dahl. I think that Tapia proved himself that he's a big leaguer.
He can hit.
I think that he can hit. He can run. He can cover some ground in the outfield. I think he needs to be in your lineup. And David Dahl can swing it too. I think if I was the Rockies, I think I hold that I don't do anything right now with first base. That you let Ian Desmond man first base and plan on Tapia and Dahl and Blackman in the outfield. I don't know, but at the same time, I wouldn't be against them adding maybe a cheap bat that could play first base that they can just kind of plug in there and let Desmond roam the outfield and help out these younger guys. Because I don't know if you can really plan on two very young outfielders to really hold down the fort. Even though you have Blackman out there, both those corners are going to be really young. You could probably use some veteran presence out there. So maybe they could throw a little bit of money at a bat to play first base, even as a backup first baseman, so you can move Desmond to the outfield, give the guys some days off. I think that would be the best thing to do. What do you think?
Well, and we were talking about it before the show. I feel very flexible now, knowing the fact that Ian Desmond is versatile. Because really, at the end of the day, you're starting to see those players be incredibly valuable to a team. Look at Ben Zobrist. I mean, he can play anywhere. He's probably best suited for the infield, but he can play anywhere. You put him in left field, you put him in right field. You put him at third base, you put him at second base, you put him at short. He can, and maybe first base. You can put him anywhere. He might be the more best suited utility player in the majors. And so I really think that, for Ian Desmond, he also is one of the prime utility people in the game right now. They can play left field, he can play right field, he could play center field. I mean, he plays center field pretty darn good for the Texas Rangers, and he can play first base. I mean, he at least showed that he's capable, at least. And
Ian Desmond used to be a shortstop.
Right. And, I mean, that was his.
Forget that.
Right. I think people forget the fact that he has the hands to play first base. And as far as the athletic wave of first baseman, certainly I think Ian Desmond can fit that mold. But speaking of athletic first baseman, obviously it's been reported that the Rockies could be one of the teams that might want to vie for the services of Eric Hosmer. I don't know how I feel. I mean, I would really love the move overall, putting him in Coors Field as a 28, 29-year-old, knowing he's still in his prime, and he's a guy that can legitimately change a lineup. I mean, the Rockies lineup is already really good, but you put him in that game with it's kind of like Yoenis Cespedes. Any team Yoenis Cespedes and lineup that Yoenis Cespedes has been on, it changes the entire complexion of a lineup. And then you look at the sake of what an Eric Hosmer could do for this Rockies lineup. I don't know if I want to pitch to anybody. because of the sake that, Trevor Story got hot late in that season, and Trevor Story's a guy that has shown if he can focus and understand where his strike zone is, he is a very deadly hitter if he can limit the strikeouts. And so I think that for the Rockies, do you want to throw a lot of money at a guy like an Eric Hosmer or a guy that you were very close to signing a few years back and potentially want to trade for, and that's Jose Abreu? I think Jose Abreu, to be honest with you, might be a better fit and potential trade partner as far as a first base go than Eric Hosmer, because I think that Jose Abreu might even be a better consistent hitter than Hosmer.
Yeah, Jose Abreu would mash in Coors Field. I would die to see that. That's a lineup changer for me. I think Hosmer is a fit. He's a good fit. I think Abreu is a threat. He's, you're not going to want to pitch to him at Coors. I would love to see that. I doubt that they make the move. I don't know if they have enough prospect power. I could see somebody like the Diamondbacks making a move.
That's if they lose Martinez, maybe.
Yeah, after losing Martinez.
Or if they lose.
I could see, yeah, if they lose him.
Yeah.
But, they have Goldschmidt over there, too. So, I don't know. But somebody's going to have to put their chips in for Jose Abreu, because that's just the talent that's being wasted over there during that rebuild, and everybody knows it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, somebody's going to make a move for him. It would make a lot of sense for the Rockies if they will give up the assets, but I don't know if they will. If they sign Arrieta, why not? Why not give up some prospects?
Just do it, yeah.
Abreu and just go for it.
Well, and
you can win a series.
Well, and I would just even say that no matter what, even if you don't get Abreu because you made the postseason and because of, obviously you disagree with it, but as far as how the youthful rotation went, that may have been better than people thought, and you went to the postseason. I still think that you have to have that alternative, that you have to go for it. And I think that's why you're starting to see him be sprinkled in with a Jake Arrieta. And I think that could this be the year that they finally land Jose Abreu? Because that rumor has been thrown around ever so often, I think, in the last few years. So it's possible that maybe a deal does go down. Because I think that if you were the Rockies, maybe you sprinkle in a Ryan McMahon, potentially for and maybe you want to sprinkle in maybe a Yency Almonte. And I know, I don't know how Rockies fans would be with that, but in order to get a really good hitter, you got to get up some really good prospects, and Yency Almonte is a pretty good one right now.
And Riley Pint's sitting there too. Maybe
Riley Pint, yeah. It just depends on as far as comfortability and who they want. Go back, 30 years from now, the Los Angeles Angels acquired Nolan Ryan, but they really, wanted one of their other pitchers. And so they ended up acquiring Nolan Ryan, and we all know how that turned out. So I think that for the Rockies, they just have to I think this could potentially be the year where they bite the bullet and trade maybe one or two of their key prospects to get something pretty good. But that's just kind of the hunch that I get because of the fact that they made the postseason this year.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I mostly see that happening if they get a big pitcher. If they get a big pitcher, I bet you see them they push the chips into the middle of the table, and they're going to go for it. I think that will happen.
A guy that's really interesting, and I guess here I go. I say that was the last question. We just keep talking baseball. Sorry about that. But a guy that's really interesting to me, and I heard a baseball insider on Twitter talk about this. If Tyler Chatwood gets given a multi-year contract by another team, because people could potentially view him as a Charlie Morton, why was he not so consistent in the days that he was with the Rockies? Because he was the right-handed version of a Jorge De La Rosa. He was giving up a lot of walks, but I think the reason why a lot of teams are really looking at a Tyler Chatwood is because of his road ERA. Because he has the ability to pitch on the road. So Tyler Chatwood is kind of that interesting guy.
Yeah, I think he could be one of those guys that gets signed as a fourth or fifth starter, and if he doesn't work out, gets shoved to the pen on a contender. I could really see that happening. And, or one of those guys they're going to give him a shot in the rotation until a big-name prospect is ready to go and just see if he can cut it. I could see that happening for him. Or you could look at a team like, like the Reds or somebody like that who could throw a couple years at him and a few million and plug him in the rotation for a couple years. He is a really polarizing guy. He could go a lot of different ways.
He really can. He can go bullpen. He can, maybe he's kind of the Ben Zobrist pitcher. You can put him in, maybe not a closer's role, but you could put him in maybe the long inning relief. You could put him in maybe middle inning. You could put him in as a fourth, fifth starter. He's very versatile. But I think it got to the point with all those walks that the lack of consistency wasn't there for him. Well, hey, CJ, thank you very much, man, for sorry to take so much of your time, but thank you very much, man, for contributing to the show, talking fantasy, talking the MLB Free Agency, and I'll be glad to have you on here on Tuesday.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, Cameron.
Hey, have a good one, man.
You too.
You too. That was CJ Krainock talking about the MLB Free Agency, also talking about the more important world of the fantasygurus.org that he's a part of. He's a fantasy insider. Please follow him. He's at CalCrainock21. We call him, or I call him the Krainock. That was the Krainock section of the Cameron Parker Show. When we come back, we're gonna talk about the Denver Broncos a little bit. We're gonna talk about how this season has transpired, because it's been a frustrating whirlwind. It's been a whirlwind that has seen its ups and downs. And right now, as far as a 7-game losing streak, you're now teetering to the process of, well, do the Denver Broncos embrace the tank? We saw the New York Giants name Geno Smith starter and not Eli Manning. So the streak that Eli Manning was on that could potentially tie Brett Favre is now over. So when we come back, I'm going to play a song by the good buddy Sayer Benninger. But when we come back, we're going to talk about this Denver Broncos season. This is the Cameron Parker Show.
Let the heavens roar and all that's within me. Can't stop singing now. Revival is coming. There's no other name. To you be the glory. Every victory you have delivered me. Don't ever stop. Come on and sing it now. Lift up a shout of praise. With all my heart, I will bless your name. Give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me. Sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. Everlasting love, oh, it surrounds me. Vindicating grace, my God, you're amazing. Don't ever stop, come on and sing it now. Lift up a shout of praise. With all my heart, I will bless your name. Give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me. Sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. With all my heart, I will bless your name. Give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me. Sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me. Sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. With all my heart, I will bless your name. Give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me. Sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cameron Parker Show. As always, talking about the baseball coverage as far as the winter meetings, the MLB Free Agency. We talked about it as far as fantasy was sprinkled in. The college carousel with the Oklahoma State head coach Mike Gundy potentially leaving to Tennessee. We broke news today that Mike Gundy turned it down and that he will remain at his alma mater, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. We're talking about the Denver Broncos. It's a very difficult situation right now for the Broncos. They have to do all that they can. They have to do all that they can to see what they have in the future. Obviously, Paxton Lynch ended up getting the start, and it was abysmal. But the fact is, our expectations really, for me, really for the Broncos, the expectations should have been dampened anyway because of the play in the preseason and because of the fact that, well, he has a short sample size and he played bad. And to make matters worse, he injured his ankle, and it's a high ankle sprain that will now sideline him for 2 to 4 weeks. It's a very dire situation because of the fact that the Broncos now could potentially put a hold again on the evaluation process of Paxton Lynch. But it's a different area too because of the fact that the Broncos could, if they wanted to, choose to move on from Paxton Lynch, and really all alternatives at this point should be considered for the Denver Broncos as far as, the quarterbacks on their roster. I don't know if Trevor Siemian will be on this team next year. I don't know if Brock Osweiler will be on this team next year. For one, all three quarterbacks are coming cheap. They're not paying the 4-year, $72 million contract that the Houston Texans are paying him, and that was consumed by the Cleveland Browns for Brock Osweiler. So every single quarterback on this Denver Broncos roster is coming cheap. And I think if you were to ask me, certainly at this point in the season, I really do feel that the Broncos will do everything that they can to throw a lot of money at Kirk Cousins. As disappointing as this season is, you know for a fact that John Elway is going to throw all kinds of money to ensure that he gets the player and gets the guy that he wants, whether that is a Kirk Cousins. I feel like Kirk Cousins is their number one target, and maybe an Eli Manning sprinkled in there as well. The Jacksonville Jaguars could potentially be a certain target necessarily. So I do think if you are the Denver Broncos, you have to consider all options, and certainly I think that option has to be Kirk Cousins first and foremost. And if you don't end up landing a guy in free agency, and if you don't land the quarterback that you necessarily want, and if you end up having the news that Sam Darnold is potentially coming out, well, that gives you so much flexibility to the point where you could potentially go many different ways. Let's just say that they sign Kirk Cousins in the offseason or sign Eli Manning in the offseason. That opens a lot of avenues for you to go. Let's just say that Saquon Barkley is available now at 4 or 5 or wherever you are, inside the top 10 or just outside, inside the top 5 and outside the top 5. That gives you so much as far as wiggle room to make decisions that could impact your football team as the best player available. We know they want to upgrade the offensive line, so that gives you that point where you want to go after a guy like maybe Connor Williams, a flexible tackle. His feet are incredibly quick. He's strong. He could potentially play a left tackle if you wanted to, and move Garrett Bowles to right tackle. Nick Kendall, you can go back and listen to the podcast. Talked a little bit about that and kind of delved into why he felt that Garrett Bowles is maybe a better right tackle than he is a left tackle, and then maybe fitting in a guy like a Connor Williams at left tackle, it gives you flexibility to where you can upgrade that left tackle spot or right tackle spot by basically putting that in there. But it just, as far as the best player available, it gives you the point where you can either go quarterback, you can go tackle, you can go maybe maybe you can go corner, depending on how high. Potentially, that's a little bit of a risk. But it just depends on as far as who's available at that point in the draft, and depending on where you are. And so I think that for the Broncos' sake, they have to consider all options. And I think if you get Kirk Cousins, well, you're looking at the scenario where potentially Brandon Marshall could be gone. You're looking at a scenario where Aqib Talib could no longer be back. And obviously we heard the rumblings that the suspension was now 2 games, has now dropped to 1. And taking a little bit of a back seat there, the Broncos, I was obviously one of a few there, but I really felt like I'm not one, here's a little history lesson about me. I'm not one overall that has really liked fights overall. However, understanding where the Broncos are as a football team and this defensive veracity that this unit has, they have been lacking as far as that kick in the pants. We play pissed off every single game to the point where everything matters. Every single play, every single down, it matters to us that we are going to win this football game. And for the Denver Broncos, it just hasn't been that this season. And so going with this Broncos team, seeing them play with so much fight for each other as a defense was a very good sight against an Oakland Raiders team. And there was a lot of factors into that were just great. The rivalry between the Oakland Raiders was down. And so this really could jumpstart potential things as far as a rivalry between the Aqib Talib and Michael Crabtree. That legitimately was a relationship that they hate each other. Aqib Talib and Michael Crabtree have that history going back to last season. They hate each other. And absolutely, it played into the factor of why they ended up fighting in that game on Sunday. And to the factor of they are both very bad football teams in the AFC West. They've the Kansas City Chiefs, the Oakland Raiders, the Denver Broncos all opened the door for the Los Angeles Chargers to play exceptional football to the point where they might get into the postseason. I come back to it again. I said it before, and I said it before this season. The Los Angeles Chargers are a team that will surprise some people. I knocked it at a point, but the fact is the Los Angeles Chargers are a pretty good football team if they can get the defense in order. And once you have 17 under center, you will win a lot of football games. And right now, they are winning some meaningful football games that could potentially get them into the postseason. As far as the Broncos is concerned, they really have to figure out what identity of this football team is, whether that is gutting it, embracing the tank like the New York Giants have, a team that, based on this season, had beaten the Denver Broncos very handily as a winless football team, and they obviously owned the tiebreaker over the Denver Broncos. If it came to it that the New York Giants won a football game, that would mean that the Broncos would move up a spot. If they lost a game against, let's just say, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Giants won their matchup this coming weekend against the Oakland Raiders, that would mean that the Broncos are one step closer to being and solidifying a top pick. Now here's this notion about Derek Wolfe. I don't know if you guys were listening to the drive on, certainly, but Derek Wolfe was on, and you kind of got this sense potentially that, well, things aren't potentially good for him right now. You start to say that he was losing some feeling and some of his, in some of the parts of the body, and that kind of tends to believe that, well, you're looking at a scenario, a guy that is 27 years old, a guy that has meant so much to this Denver Broncos defense. It's a scenario that is very scary and it's a point that you have to consider as a football player. You look at Chris Borland a few years back. He was one of the best young linebackers in all of the NFL. He was getting a lot of concussions from his time in college and then now into the pros. It was the scenario where everything started playing into his head. It obviously helped matters that he was in the medical field, but really it played into his brain that football is not the end game. And if he's playing so violently on the football field, it's going to contribute to potentially, it's going to play a part into potentially him not being able to play football anymore. So it's a lot of factors that Derek Wolfe certainly has to consider. And if there's one person that wants to never be taken out of the football field, it's Derek Wolfe. And so it's coming to the point, I think, where he's starting to realize that maybe his days are numbered, that his days are potentially numbered on a football field. And we'll see if Derek Wolfe could potentially be a surprise retire potentially this offseason or next offseason. But with the NFL and as violent and as history shows, it's potentially a scenario where he might have to hang up its cleats if it's wearing on him in a negative fashion. But for the Broncos' sake, it would definitely take a wind out of their sails as far as the defense. And we talk about some of the leaders on that team, Aqib Talib and Chris Harris and Brandon Marshall, Darian Stewart, and then you get a guy like a Derek Wolfe in there. It'll weigh a lot as far as on that defense, and it would sucker punch him. He's been, as far as the defense in the last 3 or 4 years, I don't know if there's been a more vocal player on that defense that's going to be completely honest, and it's going to tell it like it is. Obviously, there's a lot in there, but there's really only a few that will tell it like it is, and Derek Wolfe is incredibly honest. You go back to the games about a few weeks ago, he was incredibly honest and basically was saying exactly the way the Broncos country felt, and it's a very tiring topic to talk about how the Denver Broncos are losing, and no one wants to talk about losing more than the Denver Broncos players because they're sick of it. And if they are sick of it, well, then they have to prove that it's no longer going to be an issue. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has been the conclusion of the Denver Broncos and as well as the Cameron Parker Show. We are 15 minutes over, but as always, I want to thank you guys for tuning into the Cameron Parker Show. Follow the show handle at CP_show and follow my handle at Cameron Parker PO. And be sure to subscribe to the iTunes podcast, the iTunes Cameron Parker Show podcast on iTunes. Watch us on YouTube. Follow us on Spreaker. And as always, thank you very much for making the Cameron Parker Show part of your evening. You guys have a great night. And on Thursday, we will have a special broadcast on Thursday, which will involve Mario Vatanzi. And we'll discuss everything in the National Football League's side of things as well as the Broncos. And so we're going to get his side of things, talk about where the Broncos are going to go from here, or potentially preview the Miami Dolphins. We're going to talk about a lot of things. But this is the Cameron Parker Show, and as always, thank you for listening.